But anyway, hello London, how are you guys? Good? Woo! Okay, so we have 50 minutes. I'm gonna take you through a thought around how big organizations should really be rethinking their approach to accelerating growth and value. I'm gonna show some examples and then we'll do some Q&A. I have some interesting new stuff if we still have time, which kind of looks at our measurement approach and what we've been doing from an integrated planning perspective over the last 2.5 years, but let's see what happens. So, really quickly, Bonin Bough, Vice President of Global Media and Consumer Engagement for Mondelez International. Before this, I was head of digital globally for PepsiCo, and I started interviewing for the job with now my current boss, our CMO, Dana Anderson, and she said something to me. She said that she believed that all media was digital and they wanted a digital person to help chart the future of media. I thought she was on drugs. I almost fell off my chair because I had never heard such a profound statement from such a large organization. And then I began to realize that what she was noticing was that there was an inflection point, and that inflection point was really driven by consumer consumption, consumer behavior, and that consumers were now consuming these channels en masse, and that still, media planning as a whole hadn't really shifted to taking into account this new consumer behavior in a way that could continue to drive accelerated growth. And so it began me thinking, and here's kind of where the story starts. If you were a television, if you were a clicker in the 1950s, is that me? Sorry. Pause. Be right back. There we go. Okay. So if you were a television executive in the 1950s, and I came into your office and I said, I really want you, a media executive, I really want you to invest in this thing called television, you'd probably laugh me out of the room and say, you know what, this thing that I have called radio works really, really fine. But what's interesting is that 3 organizations, P&G, Kraft, and Unilever, began to see that consumer consumption of television was eclipsing where investment was going, and they made a bold move to jump in. And as a result, they pretty much built 50 years of competitive advantage on being the best TV marketers in the world. And I would argue that we're actually at a very similar inflection point. Okay. Back one. Oh, sorry, no. Go back. There we go. So am I not controlling it? You guys are clicking. Should I just say next slide? Okay, all right. So we're at a very similar inflection point where when we look at mobility and the growth of mobility, 24% of media is consumed on a mobile device, but less than 1% of spending. And so I would argue that there's this huge delta opportunity. You can go to the next slide. As a result, the boardrooms of most organizations look very much like this, right? And so there is somebody at the front, probably a CMO, who says, you know what, I think we need a mobile strategy. And then somebody looking up from their device, very distracted, finally says, I'm sorry, but did you say something? But what's interesting is it's not an example, it's not just an example of boardrooms, it's actually an example of society at large. We have become the most distracted society in human history. But the amazing thing about humans is that we'll never admit that we're distracted. Instead, we'll say, no, keep talking to me while I text because I'm multitasking. Unlike everybody else, I can multitask. But in reality, they're lying to you. And there was a study that was done by the American Psychiatric Association. And what they did was they took 2 groups. They asked one group to use mobile phones and multitask, and they asked the second group to smoke marijuana. And there was a 10-point drop in those that that multitasked and used mobile phones, which was twice as much as those that smoked marijuana. Which means 2 things. 1, you're better off being a pothead than pretending that you can multitask. But it also means that we have divided attention on these devices on a continual way. You can go to the next slide. But still, amidst these facts, every single senior leader asks me the same thing. They say, Bonin, but our biggest question is mobile at scale? So we did a little bit of research, and it turns out there are 7 billion people on Earth, 5.1 billion own a cell phone, but only 4.2 billion own a toothbrush. So if you believe that toothbrushes are at scale, then clearly mobile phones are. You can go to the next slide. Should I use the clicker or no? Okay, makes life a lot easier. Okay, here we go. But still, I get the same question. Yeah, but you're talking about feature phones and you're talking about text-based phones. What about smartphones? But when we actually look at the growth of smartphones, it's happening faster than any other media that we've seen. These are US numbers, but this is a global phenomenon, and I'm more than happy to talk global numbers as well. But it took 38 years for radio to reach 50 million, 13 years for television, 4 years for computer, and 2 just for the iPhone, which is arguably the third most important operating system as we move forward. It'll probably go Android, Microsoft, then the iPhone. Any Microsoft guys in here? No, they love it when I say that. I don't know if it's really going to be Microsoft number 2, but let's give them a hope and a dream. No Microsoft guys, right? But in fact, more Android devices are turned on every single day than babies being born. So we're seeing the rate of adoption of this device at a speed that we've never seen anything else. I love this. It says, honk if you love Jesus, text while driving if you want to meet him. So even our religious institutions understand the importance of mobility, but still big organizations have failed to adopt quickly. How many people in here have ever thought that their phone was vibrating and when they reached in their pocket to check, it wasn't? Raise your hand really quickly. End of the day, come on, I need some participation. Okay. Well, it's not just you. You're not alone. In fact, it's a disease that's called phantom vibration syndrome. And they say that people who have this regularly experience a tactile hallucination that's similar to meth addicts. So it's almost become this drug. In fact, other studies actually showed that using mobile devices and social media is as addictive as cocaine. So Twitter and Facebook might just be gateway drugs, and there's some guy in a dark alley saying, I just need a text message. Please just give me a status update. I'm fiending for a status update. And while we're strung out on this thing called mobility, we have this man to blame. Very nice gray-haired gentleman, Martin Cooper, who invented the mobile phone at Motorola. But what's interesting about his story is that he believed that what he was creating was a device for us to transmit voice. But in reality, what he was creating was a world of connected devices that would transform organizations, business, society, riches of some, en masse. Now, one of the big, actually there's a great article in the new Harvard Business Review around connected devices and what it'll change to the business landscape. But one of the most interesting things is a study that Bain did. And what Bain said, they said that by 2020, they believe that every single consumer packaged good that's sold in a grocery store will be connected to the internet somehow. Which means that when you think about the scale of products, billions and billions of products that we sell every single month, we might become some of the world's largest technology companies. And what worries me every single day is that we don't look like the world's largest technology companies. We don't look like Cisco. We don't think like Facebook. We don't operate at the speed of Twitter. We're not fast as like Snapchat. And so what we have to figure out is how do we, as organizations, begin to set ourselves up to take advantage of this future that lies ahead of us, a future which will be driven by accelerated growth coupled with the growth of consumer adoption of these channels. And I believe that it starts at first, and this presentation is going to be a lot about this. While I'm showing case studies, I'm actually going to be showing the work of individuals and talking about those individuals, because at the end of the day, what this is driven by are how do we change the mindsets and the culture of our organizations in order to unlock that future. And part of it begins with the fact that I firmly believe there will be an attack on talent in the next 3 to 5 years that will be unprecedented. And it will be driven by 2 things. One is that most of the institutions and organizations that you graduated for and then now work for, or that you graduated from and now work for, didn't really prepare you or are not continuing to prepare you to think in this new digital era. So we did a little bit of research again, and less than 1% of the course descriptions of the top 100 business schools even use the word mobile, emerging, or digital technology. And it begins to make sense when you think about it, because most of the people who are teaching in these institutions probably haven't been in business for the last 10 years. They probably haven't been a part of this revolution. And so we're graduating MBAs into the world that aren't really prepared for the type of thinking that's necessary for this next generation of organizations. And then you walk into a big organization, and while we talk a lot about innovation, we're not set up with the process, the measurement, the systems to actually take advantage of this. In fact, I'll give you an example. I once was working with the CMO, and they were taking about 70 marketers to a major business school, and they asked me to review the 1-week agenda. And I look at this 1-week agenda, and I said, well, there's nothing on here about digital. They said, whoa, digital? We're trying to teach marketers the basics. I said, the basics are when? The 40s? I don't understand. The basics have been rewritten, but yet we're not preparing this generation. Which all of that would actually have been really okay if it wasn't for the fact that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, big organizations like Amazon, Google, began to grow. And they had the same type of talent, the same MBA. Those folks have run the same size businesses, the same size P&Ls. They've grown businesses, in some cases, wildly faster than even big organizations that have been established have been able to grow. And when I talk to all of them many years later, they all say the same thing to me. They say, you know what? We're tired of selling books. We're tired of selling e-com only. We believe that we can reinvent industries. We want to sell chocolate. Bonin, we want to sell cookies. We want to reinvent diapers. We want to transform hotel industries. We want to reinvent transportation like Uber. And they're all beginning to look at established industries, established organizations, and saying, you know what? We think that we can do it better. And what we have to ask ourselves is, as organizations, are we prepared to prepare the talent that we have inside of our four walls to compete? To have, by the way, these guys have the exact same credentials. The only difference is one group has digital affluence. So are we prepared to train the next generation of leaders and really build that skill set? Because not only do we owe it to them because they've given themselves to us as an organization, but it's also our opportunity to unlock great value. And so as a result of that, I began to look and try to understand what is different between organizations that were built of a past generation versus organizations that were built of this generation. And one thing that I alluded to already is that somehow these newer organizations have been able to create tremendous value in a very short period of time. So here's organizations that have been around for 100 years, and then you have organizations that have been around for 6 that have double or 7 that have double the valuations, and they've been able to unlock greater value in a faster period of time. So why? Well, one, as we mentioned, it has nothing to do with time, and we see this time and time again. No pun intended, but I guess it worked. Anyway, mailbox, $100 million it sold for in less than 4 months. It also has nothing to do with size. 13 people sold Instagram for $1 billion. 13 people sold Instagram for $1 billion. So it has nothing to do with the actual size of the organization. It also is not unique just to this industry, but it does feel like it's unique to new industries that are being born. So here's MakerBot, right? MakerBot sold for $403 million and pretty much are transforming the industrial revolution when you hear folks like Beth Comstock and what they're doing at GE and the reinvention of kind of maker movement and 3D printing. It also has nothing to do with geography. In fact, there are over 100 places, innovation centers, that look very much like Silicon Valley. There's Silicon Alley, Silicon Beach, Silicon Lane. It's like Silicon Forest. You're like, with all this creativity, can we come up with a better name than just Silicon something? But I guess that's kind of their level of creativity. Don't tell anybody I said that. It also has nothing to do with age. What do all these kids have in common? Well, they're actually all founders. The kid on your far left created an app called Bustin' Jeeber. Bustin' Jeeber, you guys laugh. He gave a TED Talk. I'm talking at ad tech, you see? That's what kind of my career is at right now. Just want you guys to understand where I'm playing from. It also has nothing to do with education. Peter Thiel, great article in Fortune last month or last week, is paying kids not to go to college. He's paying them $100,000 because he believes he can unlock greater value than the education system can provide them with or prepare them to. And it begins to make sense. Guys like Sergey dropped out of college. Guys like Zuckerberg dropped out of college. Karp, who created Tumblr, dropped out of high school. He doesn't even have a high school diploma, and he sold Tumblr for $1 billion, right? I know you're saying Yahoo will buy anything, so I guess that's okay. No, just kidding. We love a good Yahoo. So it's really nothing to do with education. So even, and it's even a cultural phenomenon. So even rock stars are saying that coders are kind of this new strain in culture, this new thinking, this new unlock for the world. And it begins to make sense because when you look at the publications that kind of dot our cultural landscape, you begin to see Biz on the cover of Billboard, Jobs on Rolling Stone, Sandberg on Cosmo, Bonin on Campaign. Come on, that's so good. Anyway, so the question really becomes, is what is happening here? What is going on? What is the phenomenon that's driving it? And I would argue that it's this unique growth of this notion of hacker. this hacker mindset, this hacker mentality. And when we originally think about hacker, we used to think about people who tamper with computer systems, people who break into mainframes. You know, oh my God, J-Lo's been hacked, Twitter's been hacked, China's been hacked. But it's not that negative definition. It's actually, if you look, there's a second definition to the word hacker. And what it talks about is somebody who programmatically takes a different approach to solve problems. And in fact, actually begins to break things to unlock greater value. And what's interesting is that the organizations of this generation have taken that on as a cultural moniker. Here's Facebook, right? So the Hacker Way, you go to the campus, they're on one Hacker Way, they have Hacker Square. It's become a cultural mindset that drives every single way that they approach the business. And I would argue that this is an interesting business phenomenon. I've been talking about it as this notion of hackonomy. And really what it talks about is, how do we create value by breaking things? How do we break our organizations? How do we break our process? How do we break our traditional approach? And I personally feel the most important is, how do we break ourselves? How do we make sure that we're reinventing ourselves on a continual basis to make sure that we're not only competitive, but we're also unlocking the greatest value possible for the organizations that we work for, and as organizations, unlocking the greatest value possible of the people who work for us. And it begins to make sense because some of the best things in the world were actually created by hacks. So the Facebook like button, 48 hours, was created by a Facebook hackathon, arguably something that has changed the world dramatically as we know it. Other companies are hacking established institutions. So Open Airplane believes that they can create the Uber of airplane travel. Now, I literally travel all the time, but I'm never like, you know what, I think I need an airplane. Let me just check. Oh, 5 minutes away? Okay, that's going to work for me. I don't know. So I don't know. Not all models will survive. But other people are also hacking the body. So here's a guy, Stellog. I believe he's a UK citizen, actually. Am I right? Does anybody know Stellog? No? Okay. You're like, no, we don't know a guy who has an ear implant in his arm. That's not who we hang out with. So Stellog, what's interesting is what Stellog's doing is he's hacking the actual human body to see what the future might bring. And in this ear that's implanted in his arm, he actually has Bluetooth microphones, a Bluetooth microphone implanted. So when his phone rings, he can answer it by talking into his ear. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me now? Well, that joke never works. Anyway, he also has Bluetooth speakers implanted in his mouth. So when somebody speaks, he moves his mouth as if it was somebody else's voice coming out of his mouth. But what he's doing is he's really hacking the notion of humanity. Here's Hugh Hare, who's also hacking the body for maybe what is a more noble cause. Hugh Hare's story is super simple. At 16, he was considered one of the world's top mountain climbers. He got caught in a storm on a mountain with his best friend. His best friend died, and he lost both of his legs. After a week of being back from the hospital, his brother, realizing how much he needed to climb, took him out climbing. And as he was climbing, he chipped a toe on his prosthetic. But then he realized that by chipping that toe, it actually allowed him to climb better. He went home and he began to hack his prosthetics. And he learned that he could actually climb better with a pair of hacked prosthetic limbs than he could even climb with his own legs. At that time, he was a D student. And he began to dedicate himself to turning disability into ability. Now, as a doctorate at MIT, Hugh Hare is considered the first bionic. A great TED Talk if you have a chance to watch it. A couple of great TED Talks. He's got a new model out. And he's created the first bionic limbs. And what he's done is he's replicated the actual body functions. And so in the same way that when you step and your leg pushes back, his leg now pushes back. He can actually control the tension of his leg. There's an app for that. I guess there's an app for everything. That joke was a lot better when everybody would say there's an app for that. Anyway, and what's interesting is that I was actually at an economist event here, and he spoke. And first he said, you know what, I love my bionic limbs because unlike you, I can update my OS. I can update and change my hardware, which was really interesting. But somebody asked him a question. They said, do you ever see a time when somebody would opt to have a bionic limb over a human limb? And he said, well, let me answer it this way. He said, imagine if you were in your 70s and your arthritic arm didn't operate like your 18-year-old one did, and there were no complications. What decision would you make? And there was kind of a hush over the crowd like this, because at that moment, everybody realized that we are entering into a world where there's a chance we might become more computer than we actually are human. And that's an interesting reality that we're going to face in the very short term. Now, there are people hacking life for other reasons. So here's Amy Webb. Amy Webb hacked her way to find the man of her dreams. She reverse engineered her social network. She talks about it and she said, how I gamed online dating to find my match, to meet my match. And she wrote a book about it, Data, a Love Story. But the point here is that hacking has driven big changes in society. And we have to ask ourselves, as we look at media, how do we begin to apply some of the lessons learned? How do we begin to take strains from that cultural and what I would argue business phenomenon that I've been calling hackonomy and bring that down to a level that can actually change the way we operate our business and accelerate growth. Having been the media guy, I'm going to talk about hacking media, and it travels across the landscape of media. So that was the one big change I had when coming over, is that I was no longer the digital guy. I now had to look over all media. And what I had to learn very quickly is that most organizations are bifurcated by a TV guy and a digital guy, and never the twain shall meet. And what that's led to, and some agencies are structured that way, and what that's led to is a thinking of one versus the other, versus a thought of integration. And how do all of these pieces work together? And I'm going to talk to you about examples of where we brought these things to life together that's really driven the growth of our business. So first, we wanted to look at where we thought the biggest opportunities for us to rethink the way we approach media were. One was rethinking mobility. So mobile is no longer just a channel, but it's the only device that can interact with every single piece of media that exists in the world, as well as the only device that you actually have with you 24/7, especially on that path to purchase. And when you think about the old adage that P&G, which is 0 moment of truth, well, this is maybe -1 moment. This not this, but you get the mobile phone. It's probably -1 moment of truth, the closest I can get to point of buying. So how do we begin to unlock the power of that device, again, to accelerate growth? Real-time engagement. Now, there's been a lot talked about in terms of real-time content creation, primarily Facebook and Twitter, but what I want to present to you is that it's bigger than that. What this is about is operating as a real-time organization. So there will hopefully be a day, and I foresee it, where first TV will be bought programmatically. We'll be creating real-time creative for that, but we also might bring that actually into real-time product experiences. So instead of just watching a commercial on World Cup, you'll actually watch a spot on World Cup, have a conversation, and maybe be able to actually go and buy a product that is a representation of all those things together, and I'll show how we've been exploring that. Media monetization. There used to be a day when people owned soap operas like a P&G, when they owned the media, and I would argue that that led to better quality. Now every brand will tell you, oh, I'm a publisher, I'm a publisher. Really all they're doing is just creating a lot of content, because what publishers do for a living is they get paid for the content they create, they figure out how to monetize it, which means they have to hold themselves up to a higher level of quality. And I'm going to talk when you begin to raise the bar of what your expectations are, when you begin to put the consumer first and make sure that you're creating things that consumers want to consume versus big branded messages where you're like, you know what, make the cookie bigger. In fact, make it as big as possible, fill the whole screen with just a cookie, and then they'll buy that. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Aspirations versus allocations, which really means it's one thing to aspire to do something, it's another thing to resource behind it. So how do you make sure that when you're thinking about taking your organization to the next level, that you really force the resourcing behind strategies? TV versus video. We no longer live in a TV-only world. This is really about a video strategy. In fact, if we have time, I'll show some reach curves that talk about the changing of consumer consumption of media and how that's transforming reach and what we have to do to reclaim reach that's lost as a result of a changing consumer landscape. And culture versus cluster. No longer do we have to buy in clusters, 18 to 34. It's amazing because we spend so much time on consumer insights and we get all this data, and I can tell you that a person who buys a cookie wakes up on the left side of the bed, and they put their left shoe on first. They usually wear blue on Wednesday. And then I go and I say, here's all my data. Can you go buy? And they go, yep, 18 to 34-year-olds who like sports. Go. You're like, what? Where's the granularity? So we're at a point now where we can actually do that en masse, and we have to think about that. So let's start off. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I have given presentations on this. About 2 years ago, we announced that we were going to shift 10% of all of our media into mobility, and I've talked about that. I've also shown this roadmap many times. I'll quickly highlight it. We had to be very, very specific around the selections that we made of where to invest that money, specific to how we were actually going to drive top-line growth for the business. And it started with 1, increasing media ROI, and 2, influencing purchase. The big buckets being reach. We knew that there were more eyeballs viewing this device, and how do we begin to plan against that from a reach perspective? How do we begin to measure against that from a reach perspective? How do we make sure that those show up in our marketing mix models and that we're taking into account that lost reach by gaining it back in mobility? And also investment. So how are we doing equivalency? So there was a point in time where we were paying more for the same exact TV show, same exact 15 or 30-second spot, running on TV, paying more when it ran on mobile versus running on TV. And we have to break away from those models, and we've changed our investment approach to get equivalency so that we're buying, so a screen is a screen is a screen, not just from a consumer perspective, but also from a media investment perspective. Engagement, social TV. Many people see the mobile device because it's so distracting. There's a lot of great charts that Facebook have shown. When a TV ad break starts, TV attention drops, Facebook increases. Actually, usually they're on par, and then the ad break increases. Many people can see that as a threat. We actually see it as an opportunity. And when we're actually deliberate in participating in social at the same time as TV, and we've talked about that with our Twitter deals, we've talked about that with Facebook, then we actually can see, in some cases, 2 times the impact or effectiveness of the TV spot, and in many cases, a larger or greater ROI of the overall campaign. And then there's impulse media. How do we begin to target people when they're close to point of buying? And in loyalty, for the first time ever, we have a device where we can actually have a loyalty relationship in store with consumer. Usually, think about how our business operates. We drop the product off at the store and we're like, good luck, little buddy. I hope you sell. And that's kind of it. That's kind of it. But now, whether it's QR code or scanning a pack or coupon or direct, any of those things, but it opens up a whole new place for loyalty. And we've experimented with that as well. Again, I'm not going to show a bunch of those examples. They're all online. We can ask during the Q&A. One thing I do want to talk about, which is I believe when we look at mobility, there will actually be a rise in platform ownership from organizations. I think we've seen a lot of great work that folks are doing. Tom Daly from Coke and the Coke app is proving this out as well. Here's an example. We launched an app called Twist, Lick, and Dunk, and it's an Oreo game. The story is really simple. 2 brands came to me and they said, you know what, we really want to launch mobile games. I said, that's amazing. Let me introduce you to some folks that build mobile games for a living. And they're like, whoa, no, we want to use our agencies. I was like, I love our agencies, but I don't think that they are the folks that build truly successful mobile games. They said, no, no, trust us. So each project close to 1 million. One got 25,000 downloads. Another one got 65,000 downloads. I was so pissed off that I said, I'm going to find a brand who's going to partner with me, and we're going to go and we're going to try to find a mobile game developer to kind of reinvent the way branded mobile games are done. And Cindy Chen, who at the time ran Oreo, was the person who believed in that and actually supported. And we found a company called Pickpock. Pickpock, big game developer, 40 million existing user base. And we went to them with 3 pieces. We said, 1, don't desecrate the Oreo because we will both get fired, and consequently you will as well. 2, if you can get the ritual of Twist, Lick, and Dunk in, amazing. But if you can't, it's okay, because the most important thing is to make the game make money. We want you to monetize the game. And so this game, you can't really see it, but under his thumb, there's actually a mobile ad. So long story short, so we sell ads in the game. We cut a revenue share with Pickpock. So this game now has 5 million organic downloads. It's got over 4 billion Oreos dunked, 1,200 years spent playing the game, #1 app in 12 countries, top 10 in 40, 250,000 daily active uniques when it peaks, and a ton of awards. But the most important thing is that it's actually cash positive. So talking about monetization and owning that piece of media, holding yourself up to a greater standard, we had to create a game that A, advertisers wanted to advertise on, and B, you can actually buy virtual Oreos in here as power-ups, and I believe we're at about $150,000 of virtual, not massively changing the world, but the point is that a game where people are actually willing to pay money to play with. So it's kind of meta when you think about it. People are actually playing an advertisement, and the amount of time is huge. And actually, the other piece that's interesting is this begins to give us a platform to begin to target with geo. So think about the fact that Candy Crush has 760 million users. we run Cadbury. We're a bigger candy company than Candy Crush is. Why don't we own Candy Crush? We're better than them. I don't understand what's going on here. But begin to think about the impact if organizations our size had platforms at that level, what you could begin to do. Data collection, targeting, all those kind of things. And imagine if, like Candy Crush, you were actually running a CAS-positive organization, but it was still a media platform in your arsenal. And when we begin to look at the amount of time that people are engaged in these type of platforms, we have one of the largest Facebook audiences in the world, but at the same time, on our game, the amount of time spent per person is so much greater sitting in front of that game and playing versus interacting with our organic community on Facebook. Now, the Facebook story is totally different when you begin to look at scale and investment, which is kind of what we're going to talk about next. So I'm going to switch gears to real time, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you guys on a journey of what we've been doing from an operational standpoint, from operationalizing real-time marketing, ultimately to the very end game, which is creating, oh, my confidence monitor went off, which is creating the ability to create real-time video at scale, and then tying that to the buying process and kind of data collection. So let's start off with Nilla. You guys are all familiar with Oreo, and that was a great piece of work, but that began to build the muscle memory for us in terms of learning the process that was necessary, legal, but then we had to take that and we had to begin to operationalize that, which meant we had to look at a bunch of different dimensions that we could learn on. One of the first ones was really, how do you think different about creative, and how do you think different about measurement of the Facebook platform? And so it's okay, I'm good. So the first piece is creative. Targeting, sorry. The first piece is actually targeting, so I apologize. Targeting, creative, and then measurement. So we start off with the Nilla brand. Darlene Latham was the brand manager of Nilla, and we came to her. It's called an entrepreneurial brand, which means very simple. You don't have any money, be entrepreneurial, right? Good luck. So we said, you know what, Darlene, we think we want to just focus all of our efforts, all of our marketing efforts on Nilla just on Facebook. And you can imagine, she's like, what, just on Facebook? I went to Big Ivy. I was supposed to come out and do 90-second big anthemic epic spots, and now all I'm doing is Facebook? Long story short, we took this journey. We started off with a Nilla community that had 16,000 users. And we went to our CIS and Insights guys, and we showed them all the different attributes. By the way, a lot of folks aren't really familiar with all the different attributes that are possible to buy against Facebook. A lot of people have actually not even seen the Facebook buying module, and they actually never bought a Facebook ad. So there was a lot of education around what was possible, and it blew their mind in the sense of, wow. And CIS, by the way, or sorry, our Insights team is our best partner through this entire journey. They realized that the granularity that we could deliver or buy against was huge. So they could take all of the data that they had on what the potential Nilla buyer actually looked like, and we could translate that into very targeted advertising. So that's what we did. So for 6 months, we bought ads against folks that are real potential buyers, which also talks about the scale of the Facebook platform. And we grew that community from 16,000 to about 300,000. Then, in the beginning, as we started growing that community, we also had to think different about creative. So we took 5 pieces of creative, and we launched with 5 different approaches, and these are the ones you see up here, because we realized that no longer is the day where I have to stand in a room and say, you know what? This is the piece of creative that will change the way people think about my brand. Go take it to the top of the mountain, shout it down to our disciples, and they will run with it and buy our product. Instead, we had an opportunity to actually create a real feedback loop from consumers to actually understand what creative really resonated or resonates with them. And here's the example of 5. In fact, the one in the bottom left actually became our most successful. It was called Bombisms, and it started off with just text. So the best families are like fudge, mostly sweet with lots of nuts. And then we began to evolve it, and we began to introduce images. And we began to learn that we would, consumers would engage more. And we began to shape the creative based on the feedback. So here's a couple of other ones. Good moms let you lick the beaters. Great moms turn them off. If you want breakfast in bed, sleep in the kitchen. And then we got a little cultural with it. Jay-Z, hey Jay-Z, thanks for stocking your villa with Nilla, because one of his songs. And then, of course, an homage to you guys. Your kid's a royal, mine's a royal pain. And so we began to you can begin to see how it begins to look very much like, or begin to paint a picture of who the potential vanilla buyer actually is. Long story short is that with $620,000, we were able to move a $140 million business by 9% just using Facebook. Darlene, unfortunately, is no longer with us. She is actually has an amazing role at another place, and she vows that she will continue to always make Facebook a part of every single marketing program that she does. And you know, when we actually look at the numbers, 5 times return on spend and 11.3 million households reached just by using the Facebook platform, very targeted, and by rethinking the way we approach real-time creative. So we began to learn the lessons of how you think different around real-time creative. The next piece has to do with a learning we had around video. I'm going to show a video and then come back and talk about it. Fortunately, I can't play the whole thing, but 7 minutes, hilarious integration. The bravery of Jim Lowe, who was the brand manager at this time, to allow this to actually be aired. Colbert called and said, you know what, we had been going through iterations. He said, I got an idea, this is really what I want to do. I want to just read the brand brief on air. Are you guys in? And I mean, it's a tough call to make. Jim said yes. And as a result, probably one of the best TV integrations that I've had a chance to work on and that I've seen. But what's more interesting and what we learned is we were participating in a thing called Clip and Share with Viacom, which they were allowing you to take 30-second clips of what was coming off of their show, and you were allowed to then share it across Twitter. And we used our Twitter channels as well as some paid Twitter media, and we began, as this thing began to erupt, we had a war room waiting and ready, and we saw, it was hilarious, so we started sharing it. And then when it took off. I mean, the engagement around it was insane, retweets, you name it. And then when we went back and we looked at the audiences, and we worked with Twitter to look at duplication versus unduplicated, we saw that we were reaching 3-4 times the unduplicated audience by using Twitter as a distribution platform versus those that were actually watching the show at the time, which began us down the journey of the Twitter TV participation, which is part of our Twitter deal, which meant that we could now use Twitter as a key distribution platform, even for our core video product. So we began to say, okay, how do we get really deliberate? Instead of this clip and share program, how do we actually build a television integration from the ground up using Twitter at its core, knowing that we were also going to use Twitter as one of the main distribution channels as well as that core TV product. And so we partnered with Fuse, which is the #1 music channel in the US, and we built, and Trident, and we built a program called Trending 10. I'm going to play a little bit of the video and then cut it off just so we can keep moving, and then talk about what we've learned. Here you go.
We at Trident are so excited about this partnership with Fuse and Twitter. Historically, what's happened on TV has driven the conversation in social media. Today, what we're about to do is use what's happening in social media to help drive television.
Media consumption for millennials these days is becoming more and more complicated, more and more diverse, and more exciting. We at Trident are committed to being part of the multi-screen environment, and we are committed to leading and helping our consumers engage with our brand.
No more making creative for billboards or 30-second spots or magazine ads that take weeks and weeks and weeks. How do you create thousands of little pieces that tell stories or different stories that accumulate to making the impact on the consumer that you were looking for?
This program really takes content creation to the next level. We're actually looking at the data at Twitter, identifying those trending topics. Fuse's team is going to be sorting through this data and coming up with those really interesting stories. People will be responding, driving an amazing conversation and editorial voice around what's happening, and then that actually will come to television. So that cycle of TV to Twitter and back to TV is something that we haven't seen before.
Welcome to the Fuse Studios. This is where we shoot Trending 10 and get the world up to speed on what's happening with music on Twitter. Fuse control room. In order to get a show like the Trending 10 on the air every day, we've kind of changed the workflow process from the studio down here. Starting at 7 o'clock in the morning, people are coming in and combing through things that are spiking in the heat tracker. The team putting together and writing stories and getting a clip up online right away just to get more content out daily and closer to when the action's happening. So really, it's a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week information exchange with consumers.
So I'm going to stop there and come back and explain because the next person on the video is me. So Farah Besner is the brand director who led the charge on this one. And what I love about Farah is her willingness to look at new models and, more importantly, to execute and operationalize them quickly. What's great, and so what this is at its core is we said, okay, music is the second most talked about topic for 18 to 34-year-olds on Twitter. How do we take that big topic area and create a show that's actually based on Twitter conversation and then put that back into Twitter? So we created, we start off by reinventing the studio experience, looking at the heat tracker, identifying real trending topics. So not just what's the largest, because that would be Justin Bieber, but actually what has changed. So we actually know what the differential change is, so we actually see it's a real trend. We take that trend, we then create content around it. We actually use the person's real tweet in the show. We have the guest hosts, and then we put content around that, and we create 10 different trends. And we air that in the morning and at night. And then what we did was we cut it up into 22 pieces of little content that we then distributed across using Twitter. And what we learned really quickly, and let's stop the video again, sorry, oops, I thought it was something else. Okay, this is the first, sorry. I'm just gonna let this play and then talk, I thought there was another slide. So what we learned quickly was nobody wanted to watch the same 15 and 30-second pre-roll on 22 pieces of content every single day. That was just not going to work. So we had to figure out how to create more content at a faster pace and keep the content creation economics low. And so we first started off by creating our own vines, which was the one that you saw, 6-second spots in front of each piece of content that were unique to the content, the trend, and also tied to the brand. But then that still was tough to keep up with that pace. So then what we did was we began to use outsource model. And I like to talk about using Vine creators as really the most native form of advertising you can actually do on Vine, because these creators have big audiences and they know how to create at scale quickly. And here's some examples of some of the creative that ran in front of these 22 pieces of content that were created by Vine creators. Oops, that's our creation. Here's a Vine creator.
Layers of riches, the world is delicious. That's how I roll with the strawberry citrus. Layers of riches, the world is delicious. That's how I roll with the strawberry citrus.
All right, guys, you got the job. And we're gonna pay you in layers.
Okay.
All right, guys, you got the job. And we're gonna pay you in layers.
Layers of flavor, that's how the world gets paid. With the strawberry citrus grape lemonade. Layers of flavor, that's how the world gets paid. With the strawberry citrus grape lemonade.
So, when we went back and we looked, what we were able to do was we were able to take what would have originally been a program that reached 18% of the target demographic, so just buying Fuse, we would have reached 18% of the target, but tying that to Twitter, we were able to reach 50% of the target demographic. So really changing reach and operating at a greater scale by using this platform in conjunction. The other piece that was interesting that we learned from the Twitter platform was that we also could begin to then reuse that data and retarget people that had watched it at the same time as be able to target those day parts when you're most likely going to buy gum. So when you couldn't be carrying a TV with you, when you were on a commute, or when you were during lunchtime. So really beginning to target people during those important day parts. So coupled with those learnings, we realized two things. One, that to be able to create content at that same scale, at pace, we needed to have new operational models. The current content economics that we have, the current way that we create video content just wasn't going to be good enough, so we had to begin to rethink that. The other piece is that we could really begin to use these platforms to add unduplicated reach. That led us to launch of Blink Studios, and I'll let Laura explain that.
Oreo's Dunk in the Dark was the first example of a brand actually tapping into the cultural zeitgeist of the moment and being able to react in real time. And it was, frankly, lightning in a bottle. It was the right people at the right time in the right place. It was an amazing opportunity. Now we're doing that every day. We've partnered with Now This News, which is a social media news network, which means that we're plugged into the actual rhythm of a newsroom, which helps us to do things that we could never, ever do before. And it helps us to actually operationalize this process so that we can trap that lightning in a bottle and do it more sustainably over time. The first stage of the process is kind of understanding what stories are bubbling up in the social universe and what's relevant in culture. And it means that we can plug into an advanced social team that helps us understand what's pre-trending. So how do we get ahead of a story before it hits the mainstream? On a daily basis, our brands and agencies participate in editorial calls and keep in touch via our Basecamp app, which means that we're ready and able to react and approve in real time. But it's really important that we understand the brand's point of view and how does the brand actually intersect with the story. And so we spend time actually working with the creative and production teams to shape out what the storyline looks like. Blink Studios actually allows us to create short-form video content that's really relevant and native to these social platforms, from a 6-second Vine to a 15-second Instagram video to a longer-form video that can live on Facebook. Not only do we get to access these clips on our owned and operated platforms, but now this news actually distributes the content across their social streams, which means that not only are we reaching our fans, we're reaching people who are consuming media and people who are consuming the news.
Not only is this a groundbreaking milestone for us, but it's also a transformation for the industry in terms of how we begin to look at really developing real-time content.
So instead of a static image or a copy line in reaction to a story that breaks in the news, we can actually respond with rich video content, from a 6-second Vine to a 15-second Instagram to a longer video that can live on Facebook. So now we ask you... We don't have to hear me again. How do I just pause it right there? Anyway, we'll stay on this slide. So, so what we did there, and that's Laura Henderson, who runs US Media, a rock star. But what we did there was we took all the learnings that we had, all the way starting from Oreo, and aspiration to be able to deliver that in real-time video, and we built Blink Studios. And if you look at what we did with Blink Studios, we actually partnered with an editorial organization who builds content that's culturally relevant, that is low-cost production, high quality at the same time, and they do that en masse every single day. So really creating this partnership between newsroom and brand so that we're able to deliver content in real time, rich video content in real time based on what's culturally relevant or based on what the brand voice and need is at that moment. To date, this has delivered 100 million views, and what's more interesting is that it's delivered those at half the cost of our average per video view. And so beginning to really see it pay out for us. And as we begin to get better and faster and deliver more and more with quality, I believe that that number is going to also come down and quickly the scale will raise. So that's pretty much been our story along the lines of how we've begun to think differently about real-time content creation. It's not only unique, the Twitter opportunity is not only unique to Twitter in terms of the combination of TV and Twitter, but you guys might have seen a case that was run, I think Marketing Magazine talked about it, on what we did with Cadbury Cream Egg. Very similar. I think the other thing that we've focused on learning is what does great creative on Facebook actually look like, and operationalizing that for our teams across the world. The Cream Egg story is pretty simple. It was a brand where we had good ROIs, but it wasn't really accelerated. And what we wanted to do was really accelerate the growth of that business. And so what we looked at was really being focused on, again, unduplicated audience reach using Facebook and TV together. And we were able to increase our reach 60% by adding Facebook to the equation versus what we would have reached just using television. So I think this integration story is pretty simple, and we can maybe talk a little longer about it. But before I do that, I do want to talk about, some of the pieces that we have tried to put in place, which is really thinking different around creation. You guys might have seen the deal that we talked about recently, our Google video deal, again on this march to shift more money into that online video space. But the piece that was also in that announcement was our partnership with Fullscreen, which is the largest network of independent content creators. So really beginning to look at how to create content with different type of content economics, because that will continue to be a challenge. The current models that we have for content creation are just too brittle to survive in a world where we have to create and consumers are consuming. Distribution. Clearly, we have 3 big distribution partners. Online video in general is a big distribution, not unique to one of these partners, I mean, outside of YouTube, but the online video space as a whole. But clearly, some of the stuff that we've been doing with these guys are really pushing the boundary and operationalizing on a global level. And then that data piece, and I've talked a lot about programmatic, where
everybody's looking at programmatic to save money, and I don't believe that that's the future of programmatic. I believe the future of programmatic is data-driven. And at the end of the day, the big unlock for programmatic will be when TV begins to be bought programmatically, and that will happen very soon. In fact, if you were at the upfronts in the US, you would have seen folks like ABC talking about it. And then if you were part of the most recent UK conversations, you'd hear some of the folks looking at that as they begin to see a better unlock. But the data that will be driven will allow better targeting and really that combination of all video. And that's where I believe programmatic sits. But at the end of the day, none of this is possible unless you actually can begin to create a culture that embodies kind of the vision that you as an organization has, and that creates runway and room for great people, whether it's Farah, Darlene, Cindy, Laura, to actually change the models that exist inside your organization. And that's what we tried to focus on so much. One of those programs that we've done that helped us do that was a program called Mobile Futures, and the whole idea of Mobile Futures was how do we bring startups in to partner with our brands? How do we really learn from the culture of these new organizations that are sitting out there? And how do we have this culture transference? In order to make that happen, we forced ourselves to begin to actually operate like a startup. So first was we did an open call across 3 pillars. We've done this, by the way, in Brazil, US, and in Australia, and we'll be launching in more markets. But we did an open call for startups, young startups that had some level of funding. Well, we received in the US, we received 300 submissions, Brazil, I think 150, Australia, another 150. And we narrowed that down, specific to the US, to 22 companies that came and presented to us. And our agreement was that we would choose 9 of those brands, 9 of those companies to partner with our brands. And we were then promising that we would actually launch a pilot. There was guaranteed funding, but we promised that we would launch a pilot within 90 days. So force ourselves to operate at the speed and pace that startups actually operate at. And if you think about a large organization like us launching 9 pilots with 9 new startup technologies in 90 days, that's a pretty big feat. But the biggest thing that we wanted to accomplish was we wanted to help change the minds of our marketers. And so the number one priority was that if you were participating in this program, you actually had to go and work for the startup for a week. And I think this next article embodies what we were trying to accomplish. So here you have Catherine Schieffer. Catherine was featured in Inc., and the article is pretty simple. It says, earlier this year, Catherine Schieffer made her daily commute to Palo Alto, California, offices of Waze, a startup that makes a social navigation app. From her seat at a long communal table next to Waze CEO Noam Borden, she made phone calls, reviewed mock-ups of the app, and participated in marathon brainstorming sessions. Schieffer, however, isn't an employee of Waze. She's a senior associate brand manager at Stride Gum, which is owned by Mondelez International, which really speaks to the fact that we wanted her to actually be a part of this startup to understand the cultural difference. And it worked. Here's some examples from all of the immersion days. All 9 brands, they came back, they all said the same thing. They said, Bonin, should we go work for a startup? And I said, no, because if our 9 top marketers leave, I will be fired, and I like my job. We need to focus people. I said, instead, imagine if you use what you learned there and you brought that to big brands, big resources, the kind of unlock that you could have as an organization. And the change in every single person who participated in the culture at large is actually very palpable. So now when I look at the brand plans, you see how far they pushed it. And I began to realize there are a couple of reasons why. One, we showed them the culture, we gave them the freedom. We used to talk about the folks who participated as entrepreneurs, people who were using entrepreneurial spirit inside of a big organization, holding them up as examples of the type of behavior that we want from our marketers in an organization. But the other big thing is that unknowingly, we actually built networks of trust for them. So now they had people in the mobile space that they could pick up the phone and call in the Valley and say, hey, I'm thinking about X, Y, and Z. You know, what do you think? Networks which wasn't their agency, who they might be nervous or judging them, but actually friends that they had built over these immersion process and over the 90 days of trying to bring this thing to life. So really changing that. The interesting thing is the only person who I probably should have said yes to go work is Catherine Schieffer, because Waze got bought for $1 billion a couple months after, but I told her I'd make it up to her at some point in time in her life. I don't know how I'm going to do that, but anyway, anybody out here creating $1 billion company I can join? No, okay. And I'm going to close with this, which is another experiment that we did to kind of rethink how the future of connected media and the future of real time might look. And I'm going to let the video play and then share some closing examples.
What would happen if an Oreo cookie you hold in your hand were a part of the social network? Oreo, the world's favorite cookie for over 100 years, dared to wonder about and envision the future of snacking distribution. So they conducted an experiment to bring this to life, tapping into the immediacy and spontaneity of social media to create custom, real-time snacks. The test kitchen was South by Southwest Interactive 2014 in Austin, Texas, where Oreo unveiled a new experimental technology called trending vending. They developed proprietary 3D printers that built custom cookies based on trending social conversations, allowing visitors to select, make, and taste cookies in real time. Twitter-powered algorithms turned each topic into unique Oreo inventions that visitors could further customize to match their mood right at that exact moment. Between all the various cream flavors, colors, patterns, and wafers, over 16,000 delicious custom Oreo cookie variations were possible. And yes, they all tasted like the cookies Oreo fans know and love, truly bringing the wonder-filled experience to life. 10,000 Oreo lovers waited in line for upwards of 2 hours for the chance to create their very own cookies and be a part of the experiment. Then they shared their experiences with the world. Feedback was enthusiastic and immediate, inspiring others to take part in this one-of-a-kind experience. The trending vending activation propelled one of the largest spikes in Oreo's social conversation and media attention since the dunk in the dark tweet of the 2013 Super Bowl. Oreo saw the highest Twitter engagement at South by Southwest among comparable food and snacking brand activations. Trending vending epitomized the iconic Oreo wonder-filled brand experience, triggering the imagination and curiosity of the media with overwhelming and positive results. Following the success of the activation, Oreo is now taking the trending vending machines on the road. Imagine a future where you could make custom snacks locally in your own backyard, fresh, on demand, and wonder-filled. Now that would taste pretty good.
So that was a little experiment that we did at South by Southwest. What was interesting is that food printing technology is here, but it's really not that sophisticated yet. We had to kind of reach into the future to create something that had never existed before. So the tubes that you see are medical grade supply tubes because there was no tubes that actually could dispense the cream at the viscosity that we needed. We had to create an entire snacking markup language, which actually controlled the rotating heads as well as drop the cookie at the right place, allowed users to actually decide what shape or flavor or trend they wanted to go after. But what we learned here was pretty simple. So we had two machines running. One, we were just choosing the trends and printing the cookies. Same exact experience. People would go up, you could look. Actually, when people saw this thing, they were like, oh my God, how is this happening? Why was it possible that Oreos are being printed in 3D? It was like Willy Wonka experience. But you could go up, you could see it happening, and then you could taste the cookie, twist it open. Exact same thing, except the difference was on the second machine, you could actually customize it yourself. So you could choose the trend and then customize the trend. There was a 2-hour line for the one that you could customize and not one person in front of the one that you couldn't. So it began to drive our thinking around customization. One of our food scientists, or our supply chain engineers actually, was there, a guy named Dwayne. And he was so inspired by this that he's beginning to try to think, how do we look at high throughput testing? How do we think different about operating a supply chain in a connected world? What does that change? So, it's projects like this that continue to drive inspiration inside of the organization to think different and provide that cultural air cover that's necessary to really unlock the power of the people who sit inside of our organizations. And at the end of the day, you saw me name a lot of folks because that's what this is all about. And there's so many people across the organization that are driving our new thinking around marketing. And it's only through really nurturing that talent and continuing to help that talent grow and encourage that talent to lead, will we as organizations unlock or hack our way to an accelerated growth future. And so at the end of the day, Alan Kay said that the best way to predict the future is to invent it, and I would argue that the best way to predict the future is to hack it. And so there you have it. I think, do we have 10 minutes?
Yeah, about 5 minutes.
Okay, fine. He's like, yeah, or 5. So there you go. Are there questions? Answers? No? All right. Sounds good. Thanks, guys.